Good afternoon to everybody.
Hello.
Hello. 1 second, just let me open the screen. Okay, that's fine. Let's see if I can organize this better. Second, just let me. Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I have, every now and then I have some problems with the screen. Just to, let's return to where we were yesterday, that is slots. We've seen how important slots are in the activity of air transport, passenger air transport. Not that they're irrelevant for cargo, but cargo generally, they take it, they fly at night, so they don't have many slot problems. So it's mostly slots have to do with passenger air transport. Now we've seen how important they are, because if you don't have a slot, you cannot fly. You're not allowed to fly, and therefore you are not able to take off and to land. And we've seen what are the criteria used. That is substantially the fact that you have, first of all, they must be assigned, slots are assigned on a non-discriminatory basis, but we have these so-called grandfather rights. That is that if a company has held slots for a long time, well, those slots will be confirmed unless they do not use these slots for at least 80% of the time in which these slots have been allocated. So this is the main limitation. Then we've seen that the remaining slots have to be assigned to other airlines that ask for these slots, and the remaining slots are to be assigned. This pool is to be assigned on the basis at least 50% must be given to the new entrants, that is to companies that have never served a certain route. The new entrant in this case is not new entrant in the airport or in the air transport industry, but on a specific route. Company A says, I want a slot to provide a route from point of origin A to point of destination B, which I have never served before. So that is what we mean by new entrant. Now let's go slightly on this, looking at this 1 second. Just let me open the, here we are. Sorry, just let me move slightly this. We see that a new entrant which has been offered a series of slots within 1 hour before or after the time requested, but has not accepted this offer, shall not retain its new entrant status for that scheduled period. So the new entrant has cannot say, I want exactly, I want the 8 o'clock in the morning slot. They can be offered up till, so they can be offered a 7:30 slot or an 8:50 slot. So 1 hour before, 1 hour after. So there's a certain amount of flexibility. Just to show you how complex this operation is. Remember always that these slots have to be coordinated with the airport of destination. So it is a highly complex job. Eventually things get settled But when it starts, well, when it starts, it is, or when the new rules came into force, it became somehow complex. We shall see also, but this is an issue that we shall see further on during today's lesson. When we have a group of airlines, obviously only one company can ask for, has a status of new entrant. It isn't that you can play on the fact that you have various companies. Let's say that Lufthansa has Air Europe, Air France has Transavia. You have other subsidiary companies. Obviously, you cannot play saying, oh, but I'm a new entrant. No, if you have a subsidiary company, company which you control, you do not have the status of new entrant. Let's go on and see what other aspects that deserve to be analyzed. Look at the paragraph that I've indicated with bold letters at the end of the slide. An air carrier holding more than 5% of the total slots available on the day in question at a particular airport, or more than 4% of the total slots available on the day in question in an airport system of which that airport forms part, should not be considered as a new entrant. So if you are an established, a big company, and you have more than 5% of the slots, so this means that you have, if you imagine, let's imagine that there are, in that case I've made, there are 208 slots, and therefore you have more than 20 slots. Well, more than 10 slots, 5%. Well, this means that you do not hold the status of new entrant. I mean, so if there's let's imagine in Charles de Gaulle, Air France asks for a slot for a route that is never served. Let's imagine Paris-Palermo, which has never served before, but Air France detains, and surely does detain, more than 5% of the slots in the whole Charles de Gaulle system. Well, they cannot be qualified as a new entrant. So this is a barrier for very big companies to sort of expand and occupy new routes. Take also in consideration this element of an airport system of which that airport forms part. Now, this is quite common. You find in many towns, you find that there's big towns, there's more than one airport. Heathrow, Gatwick, Luton, and Stansted, for example. And typically, Gatwick and Heathrow are the airport system. They are very much connected. Or in Rome, Fiumicino and Ciampino, or in Paris, Charles de Gaulle and Orly. So it says, listen, you cannot, if you have more than 4%, that is much lower than 5%, as you can see, it's less than that, you cannot qualify as being a new entrant. Just to show that there is an attempt, on one hand, to satisfy the incumbents, to consolidated enterprises which have been on the market for many years, for decades, and to not to expropriate them of their slots, but at the same time to limit their expansion on new routes. Why is this? Because a typical anti-competitive procedure, practice by a very big company, as soon as a big company sees that maybe there's some new company that wants to occupy a certain route, says, hey, listen, I'm going to occupy that route. I'm going to offer services on that route, because if my competitor thinks that that is profitable, well, it can be profitable also for me. So I will enter that route, and I will ask for a slot, and therefore I have a lot of advantages. what are the advantages of a big company? First of all, that it has passengers. So it may have, in the hub system, obviously it has passengers that are arriving from another destination, and they connect them and send them to this new destination which is created. The second element, that the big company generally has economies of scale and therefore has reduced cost when it sets up its activity. And so it has a certain amount of economic advantages which allow it to operate a route even at a loss, initially at a loss. So the practice by sort of a big company is that of blocking routes or providing services in routes which it has never served, but it feels it might be challenged by a competitor. So they're already there, they say, I will provide this route, and therefore my competitor cannot with significant economic advantage provide that same service on that route. So the result, the reaction by the regulation 1008 is saying, well, but if you are a big company that holds more than 5% of the slots in that airport, you cannot qualify as a new entrant. So first we will satisfy new entrants, and then if there is, the new entrants have filled up the 50% of the available slots, then you can discuss and have and ask for those slots and see if you will obtain, if nobody else wants that slot, maybe you can ask for it, or then you must somehow find some kind of solution by which you obtain that slot. How do you obtain the slots? Further element, just to remind you, when there are public service obligations, typically, we saw yesterday the case of the Portuguese airport system. And we've seen that there are routes, domestic routes, let's imagine from Oporto to Lisbon or to Faro, but then there are also domestic routes that go to outermost islands, the Azores Islands, which are under public service obligation. Why? Because those islands are very distant from the mainland, and the only way rapid way to get from the island to the mainland and vice versa is by plane. So there are public service obligations. When there are public service obligation, all this issue about slots is not valid. So, I mean, let's imagine that TAP or Portugalia is providing public service obligation flights from Lisbon to one of the Azores Islands. Well, in this case, they have a privilege over slots. They will, if they are granted if they have to take up public service obligation, with that public service obligation goes the provision of a slot. It isn't that they can, so they say, I will provide this service, but then they don't have a slot. It is a preeminent public interest that they provide this service at certain conditions, which are set out in the agreement, in the public service obligation agreement, and therefore they must, they need a slot. And so they will be granted a slot. So just to point out that, as you see, that the many interests, so we have grandfather rights, we have new entrants, we also have the issues of public service obligations, where clearly companies must provide that service because that service is considered of essential social and economic importance. What are slots? Now, slots are a very nice case for from a legal point of view, because we ask ourselves, what exactly is, as lawyers, we ask ourselves, what is a slot? Do you own a slot as if it were some asset of your company, or what is its nature? And is it something personal, that only you have? Can you transfer it? Can you sell it? Can you buy it and sell it? So this is from a legal point of view. There's quite a lot of discussion about what has been, a lot of discussion of what slots are from a legal point of view. Clearly, this is very important for those who live in sort of continental legal systems, with European continental legal systems with a civil law background. For those who live have a much more common law approach, the situation is somehow easier. But for us civilians, those who come from a civil law tradition, we immediately ask ourselves, what is it? Is it an entity? What is the entity? It's obviously, it's not physical. A slot is not something physical that you own, you possess. It's not the watch that you can own. It is not a building. It is not. And so we start discussing about when you have a license or a permit. Do you own the license or the permit? You have a driving license. Can you sell your driving license? Obviously not. You may not sell the driving license. But when you have a taxi license, well, we see that in most European countries, the owner of the taxi, when the taxi driver retires, he or she sells the license. So it is transferred. Just to point out that this opens a very wide scenario of what are these administrative authorizations, do something, whether it is a restaurant, a pharmacy, a newsstand, a taxi, or in this case, well, then we have a whole lot of other cases, radio frequencies, a radio station, a TV station, a mobile phone operator that operates on radio frequencies. What is their legal situation? So let's go back to slots. We know that slot is the permit given by the airport coordinator to an airline to land or to take off in a certain time period on a certain day. It could be every day, it could be once a week, it could be, but anyhow, it is specified what the slot is. But it is a time period in which you can take off or you can land. Generally, it is granted on a yearly basis. So every year it has to be renewed. This is the notion that makes it easier to understand if there has been used for 80% or less. So first of all, slots are an administrative permit which can be transferred by an air carrier from one route to another route operated by that same air carrier. You have sort of route Paris-Malta. You see that, or you have two slots, Paris-Malta. You see that there are too many, and you want to shift, and you say, well, I will shift that slot from Paris-Malta to Paris-Athens. Let's imagine something like that. So within the same air company, you may use that slot for a different point of origin and destination. Or it can be transferred between a parent and a subsidiary company. Let's imagine that Air France transfers this to one of its low-cost HOP. Air France has a low-cost airline, which is HOP. Well, they can transfer it to their subsidiary. Or when you acquire a company, you assume control of a company, well, the slots are transferred to the company which makes the acquisition. We shall see this in tomorrow's case, which Asayag has to present. What happens? But, and this is very interesting, they can also be exchanged between air carriers. Now, while the other cases, well, that is quite simple. I mean, you just say, well, I'm using the slot not to go to Malta, but I'm going to Athens. And that makes it easy. Or within the same group, you shift around slots and you pass them from one company to another company, to a parent company. When it comes to exchange from one company to another, well, this creates a certain amount of issues, because clearly you could imagine that you are somehow making money out of a license, a permit that has been given to you, and you circumvent the whole system by which you should allow new entrants to come in, or you should allow other companies to provide these services. So the problem is it somehow circumvents the whole system of the pool, where conferral of slots is to be on a non-discriminatory, transparent way. Here, instead, there are simply agreements between companies. However, let's look at this exchange, because this is interesting. So there's a license, and you have a license, and how do you transfer this license? So first is you must inform the coordinator, and the coordinator must approve this slot, because might say, oh, we have problems. But what are the conditions under which slots may be transferred from one company to another company, completely different third-party company? What happens? There has been, since the slots have been introduced, what is called a gray market. That is a gray market which is not open. It isn't that someone puts an announcement saying, I'm selling slots, puts an announcement saying, Air Company A is selling slots, so who wants to buy these slots? No, it is gray in the sense that it is not a black market, but it's not even a white market. It is a gray market in which you have to notify the transfer to the airport coordinator, but everything happens at a very informal basis. Now, first system, what was commonly used? You transfer, you don't really transfer, you exchange. You say, I'll give you this slot if you give me this other slot. Now, this one says, why is this exchange interesting? What happens concretely? That airline A exchanges slots with airline B, but receives from B slots for which it has no requirement or at uncommercial time, purely for the purpose of returning them to the pool after the exchange. These are so-called junk slots. Think of a slot that is at 6:15 in the morning. I mean, yes, you might find people who want to leave, get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, get to the airport, and then leave at 6:15. But there are not many people who like getting up so early and leaving so early. Sometimes they are, in certain circumstances, they do this, but otherwise people don't generally, on a normal basis, they don't like that very much. Or a slot in which you arrive around 11:30 in the evening, and then you have problems in a landing slot at 11:30 in the evening, and you have problems reaching the town. So these are so-called junk slots. So I'm giving you a slot at 10 o'clock in the morning, which is a valuable slot. You give me some slots at 11 p.m. or 6 o'clock in the morning. I won't use them. I will put them back in the pool. But under the table, company A receives, which has given this valuable slot at 10 o'clock a.m., will receive some monetary compensation. We do not know how much has been paid, but it is, one can imagine that if someone sells a horse and receives simply some guinea pigs or some mice, well, obviously one can think that maybe sort of the value does not really the appropriate balance of value between what is given on one side and what is received on the other. So one can imagine that under the counter money has been paid. But this is not forbidden. I mean, there's no prohibition of giving money from one company to another. So, but we don't know how much, we don't know what is the value, or rather, those who are in the air transport company may know very well what is the value of a slot, but it is not public, so there's no transparency in this transfer. Then further element is that, sorry, just one second. That since 2008, the European Commission adopted a communication on the application of the Regulation 1008, acknowledging that exchanges for slots for monetary and other considerations took place at a number of congested community airports, and the current legislation, that is Regulation 1008, did not contain an explicit and clear prohibition of such exchanges. The Commission declared that it did not intend to pursue infringement. Are you still there? Sorry. I just, yes. Sorry, just for a moment, everything went away. So now I'm just pointing out that this element is decisive, because the Commission, the European Commission, says there's no explicit prohibition. When we will look at rail transport, where you need slots to leave the station and you need a slot to arrive in a different station, because obviously if the station is congested, you cannot, you do not have a track where you can load passengers can board the train, and a track where passengers can unboard, get off board the train. We shall see when we look at the rail transport that there is an explicit prohibition of slot transfer. So this is interesting to show that while in air transport, there was no prohibition, and therefore air companies took advantage of this. In rail transport, there is an explicit prohibition. So if you have, we shall see, if you have a slot, you have a 10 o'clock slot for your train that must go from point A to point B, and you don't use it, well, then you must give it back to the pool, and it will be given to if there are any competitors, competing companies that want this that slot. Now let's see if there are further elements that some issues. Slots. I've mentioned that slots are used, have been used in the past, and still used in an anti-competitive way. And as a matter of fact, we see that when there are mergers, acquisitions, or alliances, the authorities, the competition authorities, tend to ask companies to divest, to put back in the pool a certain amount of slots. So slots are very important in a competitive environment for congested airports. First of all, if carriers repeatedly intentionally operate air services at a time significantly different from the allocated slot as part of a series of slots, or uses slots in a significantly different way from that indicated, and therefore cause prejudice to airport or air traffic operations. So this is one case where slots can be removed. I already made the example. This was quite common. Before there was high-speed train between Rome and Milan, the way to get to Milan, instead of taking a 5-hour train trip, was that of taking the plane. An hour's flight from Rome to Milan, to the Milan Linate, which is a central airport, very near. It's a quarter of an hour from the center of the town. So that was, so Alitalia, which is the dominant airline, had enormous amount of slots, had sort of from 7 o'clock in the morning till, let's say, 11 o'clock. Well, he had a plane flying every 20 minutes, at least 3 planes flying every hour. So that meant very intense use. So I had lots and lots of slots. What happened is when the days in which there wasn't much traffic, they were just simply, as I've already mentioned, doing a very simple practice. They were shifting passengers on, let's say, the 9:20 flight. They were shifting passengers on the 9:40 flight to Milan, saying, sorry very much, for technical reasons, for operational reasons, flight 9:20 flight is canceled and passengers will be moved on to the 9:40 flight. Obviously, passengers couldn't complain, couldn't say anything. They had no possibility of challenging this decision. I mean, you were told you're leaving 20 minutes late, so don't complain too much and take the next flight. What happens is that this technique was a technique to prevent competitors providing services and at the same time. So when, let's say, imagine a competitor wanted a slot between 9 and 10 o'clock, they were told, sorry very much, we have no possibility because they're all occupied, people going around Europe, around the world, and so we have no slots for you to go to use it on the Milan route, Rome-Milan route. So this is a typical anti-competitive behavior, and so repeatedly and intentionally, and you can, if you work in the industry, you know very well when this is a sort of it is intentional, because what happens is substantially the company sees that the plane is half full and says, hey, listen, let's keep it on the ground, let's find some reason for which we keep it on the ground and we shift the passengers on the next flight. So you see the airport control says, hey, but how is it that the 9:20 flight is always canceled, or several flights are canceled during the morning and are shifted on a different, passengers are shifted on a different flight. So you realize that if the company is doing foul play and trying to block a slot, preventing competitors from using it. So this is the first way in which a slot may be removed, the rule of the 80% usage, or obviously after an allotted time corresponding to 20% of the period, the series validity, no slots of that series of slots have been used. So obviously if you do not, the rule, use it or lose it. In these cases, the coordinator may decide to withdraw a series of slots. And so this is more or less what we've seen about slots, but maybe we have, what is interesting is on the one side, we have this very complex regulation of slots, of assignment, grandfather rights, new entrants, slot pool, rules by which you can obtain new slots as for public service obligation, and then operations between companies that somehow sell, exchange, or transfer slots from one company to another for some kind of monetary compensation. So this is the substantive, sort of bottom line of the importance of slots. Now, what we can do now, I'll just move out of this and ask Galea if she can present this Flughafen Hannover case.
Yes.
If you can, let's see if the screen.
I'll try. Is it okay?
Yes, I see it. Put it on full screen.
Let me
Go
see.
to, well, you can do it also to the bottom on the right-hand side. You'll find.
Okay.
Yes, that's it. Okay.
Okay, shall I start?
Yes, we're here to listen to you.
Okay, so essentially, this case is about Hanover Airport, which is based in Germany, as opposed to Lufthansa airline. It was decided by the Court of Justice of the European Union in 2003. So, by way of introduction, this case concerns the introduction of an excess fee in relation to the ground handling services offered by Hanover Airport to the airline Lufthansa. So essentially, I shall be speaking on what we did yesterday regarding the ground handling services and how an airport offers to the airline company ground handling services. For example, when it comes to the check-in, service, etc. Now, in this case, as already we've seen, Hanover Airport is the applicant and the airline Lufthansa is the defendant. Now, this case appeared before the Court of Justice of the European Union after the National Court referred it for a preliminary reference. Now, briefly, the facts of the case are the following. So, Lufthansa planes used to take off and land in Hanover Airport. Now, at this airport, Lufthansa Airline provides check-in services for Lufthansa passengers and even for other airline passengers. So this means that they are having ground handling services to their own passengers as well as to other third parties, because this is going to be important when we are going to read the rules. Now, the airport rents these check-in desks to Lufthansa, and there is a ground handling contract between these parties. Now, what is interesting for us is that as from 1st January 1998, the applicant, that is this airport, introduced several new rules, and the ones which are going to be relevant for us are the following. Now, 2.5.1, the airport operator shall offer ground handling services in accordance with the list of services offered and the table of fees payable which may be applicable from time to time. Self-handlers and suppliers of ground handling services are also entitled to the extent permitted by the managing body of the airport to provide such services. Now, 2.5.2. The airport operator is entitled to charge authorized self-handlers and suppliers of ground handling services fees for access to availability and use of its installations. Those fees intended to contribute in the sense of a commercial fee to the self-financing of the airport. Now, the terminology of this regulation, which is going to be very, very essential, is the term commercial fee and installations, because now we are going to see how the Court of Justice of the European Union is going to make a distinction amongst these terms, and even how the German court interpreted it. Now, as a result, on the 24th of July 1998, the Lufthansa airline was charged an excess fee of 151,890.74 cents. Now, the DEM refers to the currency the Germans used to have before the euro.
It's more or less like 151,000 euros. It's not irrelevant. I mean, one Deutsche Mark was more or less, it's more or less like €1. So it's a big sum.
Yes. So this excess fee covered the period from January to July of that same year of 1998. Now, as a reaction to this excess fee, Lufthansa Airline refused to acknowledge this validity of such excess fee, and therefore it did not pay. And they reasoned that up until the end of 1997, Lufthansa Airline did not pay such excess fee for its self-handling activities. So we already mentioned the fact that the Hanover Airport and Lufthansa Airline had a ground handling contract between them. And now so they used to pay for the ground handling activities, but now there is the introduction of this excess fee for its self-handling activities, and Lufthansa did not accept it. So therefore, as a result of Lufthansa's reaction, Hanover Airport brought an action before the Regional Court of Frankfurt so that Lufthansa Airline will pay this excess fee. Now we shall see what the Frankfurt Regional Court and even what the German National Court said. So essentially the Frankfurt Regional Court dismissed the action brought by the Hanover Airport against Lufthansa Airline. Therefore, Hanover Airport appealed to the National Court. And in turn, the National Court made a preliminary reference to the Court of Justice of the European Union due to the fact that this court was not sure whether Lufthansa had the obligation to enter into a contract with the airport in relation to the payment of this excess fee. So as I already stated, they were not sure whether, just like they had a ground handling contract, they will have another contract for this excess fee. And the National Court asked 5 questions to the Court of Justice of the European Union. No. So the national courts referred to both their German national legislation as well as European Union directives. So this is very interesting. Now, paragraph 3 of the BADV, which is a German national legislation, states that the airport operator is entitled to charge suppliers of ground handling services and self-handlers a fee for access, availability and use of its installations. The amount of such remuneration shall be determined after a hearing of the users' committee in accordance with relevant, objective, transparent and non-discriminatory criteria, and may in particular contribute in the sense of a commercial fee to the self-financing of the airport. So here there is also the mention of the commercial fee. Now, also it referred to Article 16, sub-Article 3 of the Directive 96/67 EC, which states that where access to airport installations give rise to the collection of a fee, the latter shall be determined according to relevant, objective, transparent, and non-discriminatory criteria. Now, the National Court asserted that the provision allows for the collection of a fee set by way of a common agreement for the provision of physical installations, which takes into account both the airport operator's interest in achieving a profit and the need to cover its costs on the one hand, and the objective of opening up the market on the other. So through this fee, it is taking into consideration the profit that the airport needs to make. Now, the National Court was of the view that this directive's main motive was that of ensuring the opening up of the market and the reduction in costs. It also made reference to the differing views that academic writers make in relation to excess fees. So the first view was that the excess fee differs from the fee for specific services usually provided by the airport operator. And the second one was that no provision of the directive provides for the collection of an excess fee, and that collection of such a fee impedes airport operators' competitors from gaining access to the ground handling market. Now, the National Court argued that even if the directive had to be interpreted as authorizing collection of an excess fee, such excess fee would be valid in the cases where the supplier of services gains access to the market without making use of the airport installations. This is because otherwise the grant of a commercial opportunity would already be remunerated by the user fee for those installations. Now, keeping all these points in mind, the National Court referred 5 questions to the Court of Justice of the European Union. Now, in the case that the first question was to be answered in the affirmative, so the Court of Justice approves it, then the second question would be analyzed. And if the second question would be affirmed, the third question would be examined and so on. So if the Court of Justice was to refuse the first question, then the Court of Justice would not analyze the rest of the questions. Now, the questions were very long, and I shall make reference to them. Now, since the first question was not affirmed by the Court of Justice of the European Union, thus we shall read all the questions but focus on the first question, since the others were not analyzed. Now, the first question was that, is Council Directive 96/67 EC, in particular Article 16.3 thereof, in conjunction with Recital 25, and the preamble thereto, to be interpreted as meaning that the managing body of an airport, within the meaning of Article 3, is...
Sorry, Galea, 1 second. Can you just stop? Because I think we've lost Asayag, so I'm I know I look rather like a shepherd who is losing his sheep, but I'm trying to understand if... yes, here we have Asayag is back online. Here we are. Welcome back, Asayag. Sorry, we'd lost you. I'm just like a shepherd. When I see a stray sheep, I sort of stop the lesson. Go ahead, Galea. Go on.
I'm sorry.
No problem. It's just that, you know, obviously, if you, you're only 3 students. I mean, if they were 30 students, the problem wouldn't be much of a problem. But as you're only 3, I mean, if losing 1, that means losing 1/3 of the class. So I mean, your value is very important. So I mean, you are 1/3 of the class. So I don't want the Galea to lose 1/3 of our public. Go ahead, Galea.
Sorry, Galea.
So the first question was the following: is Council Directive 96/67 EC, in particular Article 16.3 thereof, in conjunction with Recital 25 and the preamble thereto, to be interpreted as meaning that the managing body of an airport, within the meaning of Article 3, is entitled to demand from a self-handler and/or supplier of ground handling services to third parties payment of a separate license fee for the grant of access to airport installations in the sense of an access fee in return for the opening up of a commercial opportunity, in addition to a user fee payable by the self-handler and/or supplier to third parties of ground handling services for the rental under contract of airport installations, for example, check-in desks. Or does the directive merely provide that for the purposes of determining a user fee, account is to be taken of the criteria mentioned in Article 16.3, and regard is to be had to the interest of the managing body of the airport in achieving a profit? So that was the first question. It was very, very long, but I will be summarizing it when we will be analyzing it. Now, the second question, which was not analyzed by the Court of Justice, was if the first question would be valid. Does the airport, so I have a mistype, sorry. Does the airport operator also have the right to claim such a fee from the self-handler and/or supplier of ground handling services to third parties in sectors where the fee access to the ground handling market was already guaranteed prior to the entry into force of the directive, in particular to landside handling services? The third question was, if yes, is the directive to be interpreted as entitling the managing body of an airport, within the meaning of Article 3, also to demand payment of an additional license fee, as described in question 1 for access to airport installations, from a self-handler and/or a supplier of services in the situation of the defendant in the main proceedings who, until the entry into force of the directive or provisions transposing it into national law, paid rent for the use of the relevant airport installations. The fourth question was, may it even be mandatory to demand additional payment of a license fee by a self-handler and or supplier of ground handling services who has hitherto enjoyed free access to that market, or as the case may be to the self-handling sector alone, without being required to pay an additional license fee in order to prevent unequal treatment in relation to other self-handlers and suppliers of ground handling services. A, who have already hitherto been requested to pay a supplementary license fee in addition to a user fee, and B, who are for the first time granted access to airport installations on the basis of the legal situation.
Sorry, Galea, we've lost you. Galea, sorry. We've lost you, point B. Sorry. 1 second, let's see if you manage to catch up with us. Galea, sorry. We are.
Yes.
Okay, Galea, yes, it was. You were looking at letter B.
Sorry.
Sorry, I don't know if it was my line that went down or your line that went down.
I'm sorry. So B, who are for the first time granted access to airport installations on the basis of the legal situation created by the directive, and are henceforth being requested to pay a license fee for such access in addition to a further user fee for the use of the installations. And the last question was, if Article 16.3 of the directive entitles an airport managing body to require payment of a supplementary license fee, does such a fee, which must be paid in addition to a fee for use of check-in desks, meet the requirements of Article 16.3 in regards to relevance, objectivity, transparency, and non-discrimination, where it is determined according to numbers of passengers. So in this case, it was 30 cents per passenger checked in. Now, in relation to question 1, so I will give a summary of what it was asking. So the National Court is asking essentially whether the directive, in particular Article 16.3, thereof authorizes the managing body of an airport to make access to the ground handling market in the airport subject to the payment by a supplier of ground handling services or self-handler of an access fee as consideration for the grant of a commercial opportunity, in addition to the fee payable by that supplier or self-handler for the use of the airport installations. Now, as a reaction, the Court of Justice of the European Union did not agree with the airport's argument. And the airport's argument was that the fee for access to airport installations, which the managing body of an airport may, under Article 16.3 of the directive, collect from suppliers of services and self-handlers in reality constitutes remuneration for access to the market in ground handling services. Now, the Court of Justice of the European Union cites Recital 25 of the directive, as well as Article 16, Sub-Article 1 and 3 of the directive, and it did not accept the airport's view that the directive cannot validly regulate the terms of collection of the user fee for airport installations, because the purpose of that directive is, pursuant to its own title, to ensure access to the ground handling market and not to installations. The Court of Justice also asserted that the directive ensured free access to the market. It was consistent with the efficient operation of community airports without the mentioning of the collection of any fee as consideration for that access. Also, it mentioned the fact that airports have the financial discretion on other sources than those linked to ground handling activities, such as takeoff and landing fees. And the answer, the conclusion was to this first question that Article 16.3 of the directive precludes, so it does not include the managing body of an airport from making access to the ground handling market in the airport subject to the payment by a supplier or self-handler for the use of the airport installations. Also, the managing body of an airport is entitled to collect a fee for the use of airport installations of an amount to be determined according to the criteria found in Article 16.3 of the directive. So that body makes a profit. So therefore, whilst the managing body of an airport cannot charge an excess fee to the airline for ground handling services in relation to a commercial opportunity, it can collect a fee for the use of airport installations. So therefore, we see how the court made a distinction between a commercial opportunity and airport and charging an airport installation. And the other questions, which I read previously, 2, 3, 4, and 5, were not answered and examined since question 1 was answered negatively. I think I'm ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Galea. Let's get back to the full screen. Yes. Do you agree with the decision of the Court of Justice? What's your opinion? I mean, if let's imagine that the case has not been yet decided, which of the two parties do you think, at the airport or Lufthansa, who was on the right side, who had the best arguments?
I think that the airport was making it more difficult for Lufthansa to enter into the market financially, since it had to pay this excess fee for its self-handling activities.
Yes, well, that is a sort of a rationale, a general economic rationale, but then there's also somehow a very strong legal rationale, which somehow you have outlined in your slides. What is the general principle that the Court of Justice is affirming against, obviously, the airport, the Hanover Airport managing body?
I think the part when in Article 16.3 there is the mention of transparency. I forgot the right wording, but when it mentioned transparency, non-discrimination, objectivity. Well,
but hypothetically, there's transparency. It says, well, the fee is, you want to enter the ground handling market. These are the fees and they're transparent, so they must be public. This applies to all operators, all companies that provide ground handling services in Hanover Airport have to pay these fees. So there's no discrimination against Lufthansa. As let's imagine the case that we found in the Portuguese airport. So I don't think the issue is so much a problem of transparency and non-discrimination. Can you see some other strong legal argument that goes against the airport and in favor of Lufthansa?
The part of the commercial fee, as opposed to the use of making use of the airport installations.
Can you go back to your slides, put them back on and share them? So just I would like to point out to the class, very important point. If you can bring them back.
So.
Yes, if you go ahead, just without opening, just okay, just go ahead. Sorry. Okay, yeah, this is the slide. Now look, the point is this, is what you've highlighted in bold characters. The directive ensured free access to the market. Free means you don't have to pay anything. So it's saying you enter the market and you don't have to pay an entry fee. And then you decide if you want to provide ground handling services, check-in services, luggage services, catering services, or whatnot. You have a free access to the market. There can be limitations. We've seen the limitations according to the size of the airport. So you could say only 2 operators can enter the market, not many, or some are reserved services. But otherwise, the principle is that of free access to the market. So this is what is against the idea of collecting a double fee. You collect a fee to enter the market, to enter the ground handling services, and then you pay a contractual remuneration for the use of the desk or whatever other facility you're using, installation you're using. So the whole idea is that quite rightly the Court of Justice says free access. You can't start putting a barrier to entry. You can do commercial contracts, and you can decide, and third parties can decide whether they accept these conditions or not. Clearly, these conditions must be transparent, proportional, and non-discriminatory. So obviously they must be related to the cost. For example, how much does it cost to manage a check-in desk? Well, we see that you need someone, you need personnel, this and that. What happens if the airport does it? The airport, well, obviously has to pay someone to stay to the desk. Many airports do it. But when you have small airlines and you go to an airport, you find that there's personnel of the airport that is doing the check-in service, providing that service. So it must also be not only transparent and non-discriminatory, but it also must be proportionate. You can't bring an enormous, say, oh, but it costs, you're going to pay us 10 euros for passenger. It makes no sense. You look around Europe and you see that, well, more or less, sort of, it goes. In that case, it was 30 penning. That is 1/30 of a percent of a Deutschmark, more or less 30 cents or 50 cents or sometimes €1. But I mean, you look around European and you realize what the costs are. So it isn't that you can ask for 10 euros per passenger. So this is the main element. It's free access. Then you do a commercial contract for ground handling services. When you are doing self-handling, in this case, Lufthansa was doing self-handling, and you say, okay, you have a desk and so on, and you will pay a certain amount. So this is the main issue, is the fact that the airport used the directive that wanted to open the market, really to close the market, and to ask a further fee and to make more money than, remember, we are coming from a situation in which airports were monopolists. They were in a monopolistic situation, and they were providing all services, not only typical services of an airport, landing and taking off, assistance for landing, taking off, but all the ground handling. They're the monopoly. So if you want to open the market, well, clearly the principle of asking a double fee was against the aim of the purpose of the directive. Okay, now thank you, Galea, for this presentation. Now let's move back to, if you will, let's see if I can go back to the slides. No, it's not this, sorry. Sorry, I must go back. Okay, just let me see. Close this, and let me open this. Okay. So here we're coming to the issue that then will be developed further tomorrow in the case that Asayag will present, the issue of alliances. I've already mentioned what is the main issue. When we started analyzing can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When we were analyzing Article 101 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, at the beginning, Article 81, then Article 86. So the problem is an alliance between airlines is an agreement. So obviously, when there are agreements between airlines, well, we must ask ourselves whether these agreements are or are not sort of limit competition. Please keep in mind where we came from. We came from a system where flag carriers, that is the national airlines of each country, which were controlled by the state and still are significantly controlled by national states, had a monopoly and made bilateral agreements. Air France made an agreement with Alitalia, Lufthansa made an agreement with British Airways. There was a situation of monopoly, of shared monopoly, in which the two monopolists made agreements between themselves to keep prices very high and to exclude any sort of competition. So we're coming from that background. So clearly the European Union is trying to avoid that the system repeats itself, because obviously if you say you liberalize the market and then you authorize air companies, big airlines, Air France, British Airways, Lufthansa, to find agreements, well, obviously you would circumvent the introduction of the principles of competition in air transport, and therefore you would not arrive to the result you wanted. Now, basic principles, and we've seen a little bit of this in our preliminary lessons, but the problem is market. We know that you have to see in competition law, first of all, you must define the market, and then you must define the market share. So first of all, the market, because clearly there's no, in air transport, there's no common market between flights between Australia and Japan and flights between the US and Europe. That is for clear. It's not the fact that there are companies, maybe the same companies that are operating from Japan to Australia and from the US to continental Europe. That is not, those are not markets that are somehow can be compared, and you can somehow feel that these markets are under subject to some kind of limitation. You must find in air transport, you must find what the market is, and the market is what I've already mentioned. It is the O&D approach: point of origin and point of destination. So Rome, London, Paris, Malta, that is the route, is the market. So unless there may be some elements when, for example, in the same area you find many airports. So the route is not simply Rome Heathrow, but it could be Rome Gatwick, go Rome Luton, Rome Stansted, hypothetically. Or it could be the same, it could not be simply the route. The market is not only the route between Rome and Charles de Gaulle, but also between Rome and Orly, the other airport in the Paris area. But mainly we're talking of a route. This is the first element. Second element, which is somehow not sort of, is very debatable, at least all those who are engaged in transport from an economic and from a legal point of view somehow not altogether convinced that you have not only a route that is an O and D market, origin and destination, but also you have different kind of passengers. So time sensitive and non-time sensitive passengers. Well, time sensitive, typically businessmen, non-time sensitive sort of people who are on vacation and go on vacation. Well, I mean, if I have to go to a Greek island, well, doesn't change very much, and I spend it 1 week or 2 weeks away. It doesn't make much difference if I leave in the morning or in the afternoon. So I'm not so time sensitive. And then we have the issue of point-to-point passengers. That is, let's imagine a passenger that is going Rome to London for business, and people who are going instead to London because they mistake a plane that brings them to Jamaica, let's imagine, or to Bermuda or some other island, Caribbean island. So you see that also this is some kind of difference. As we know, a market is basic principle that is established in competition, principles of competition, is that they must be, you put together all services, in this case, services that are substitutable. So they can be, we can put in the same market interchangeable or substitutable services. So typical airport substitution. You don't arrive in Rome Fiumicino, you arrive in Rome Ciampino. Is that substitutable? Well, if you are a point-to-point passenger, that is, you are going to Rome, well, it is substitutable. It doesn't make all that difference, apart from sort of maybe transport between one airport and the other, and the center of the town is somewhat more complex, but doesn't make all that difference. Same thing, Paris. You are only going, you want to go to Paris because you must do business in Paris. Whether you arrive in Charles de Gaulle or Orly, you see that the time it takes you to go from Charles de Gaulle or from Orly to the center of the town. Well, more or less in one case, both you have an RER that brings you a rail train, a regional train that brings you from the airport to the center of the town. So, you know, it's on the whole substitutable. While they might, while if you are someone who's a connecting flight, clearly, if I want to take a connecting flight, I must go to Paris, not to go to the Tour Eiffel, but I must go to Martinique, one of the French possessions in the Caribbean. Well, obviously, it makes an enormous amount of difference arriving in Charles de Gaulle, where I have a flight that is waiting for me to take me to Martinique, or I get to Orly and I have to take going from Orly to Charles de Gaulle. Well, it takes an hour, if not more. So just to point out, in this case, the market is not substitutable. So for point-to-point passengers, the market is substitutable. For connecting flights, no, it is not substitutable. Then we have this distinction between low-cost carriers and traditional operators. The problem is that now we see that many traditional operators have low-cost companies. Air France has HOP, Lufthansa has Air Europe, and all many air companies have also a low-cost subsidiary. Then services by charter operators, which are chartered, that is a plane that is rented only for that flight. Then we have indirect flights. So instead of having a direct flight, let's say from Rome to Bordeaux, well, I have to do Rome, Paris, Bordeaux. And maybe there's not a flight there, but I have to take the high-speed train from Paris to Bordeaux. So the issue of connecting flights, and if there are alternative modes of transport, just think of Rome-Milan, Well, that is a route, but you have the alternative of trains. And so clearly high-speed trains, and more or less it takes the same time. And then the issue of competition between airports. You could have two airports which are not very distant. Just think of Belgium, Brussels National Airport, and Amsterdam Schiphol. Amsterdam is much bigger than Brussels, but Brussels also is a big airport, and you might have competition between these two airports, which are competing in providing services, maybe not for intra-European services, but providing extra-European international flights towards, let's say, the US. So just to point out that there may be elements of substitutability or of not substitutability and not interchangeability, depending on the kind of passengers and the kind of flight you're taking. So just to point out that the situation is, once we established that the market is on the basis of routes, we have only started sort of analyzing competition issues. Then what we must also consider that airlines have increasingly, big airlines have increasingly become global. This has happened especially after the after 1989, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which has opened up all the Eastern, Central and Eastern European countries, opening up to travel. Before, there was no possibility for citizens of those countries to move, to come to Western Europe. And it was very difficult for Westerners to go as tourists to those countries. You need a visa. It was complicated. Now, substantially much easier. So that opens up a huge market. I mean, opening up the Russian market means going not only to Moscow, but going from Germany to Vladivostok, which is on the Japan Sea. Well, it's just across the sea. There's Japan and Korea. So I mean, it's pretty distant. It's thousands of miles distance from Germany. So opening up Russia. And then the second element, which is an enormous effect on the world economy, is the opening up of China. When China started opening up its country and allowing Chinese to travel to Europe and Europeans to travel to China, well, this has increased enormously the possibility to travel. Keep in mind this basic notion that we have seen looking in preliminary, what is a network? The larger the network, the more efficient it is. Just a typical example, telecommunications. I mean, you have a mobile phone, you have, let's say you have WhatsApp, and you can send a WhatsApp message to anybody in the world, and that person may be in Alaska, or might be in Chile, or might be in Australia, or in some other country in South Africa, and will receive that message immediately. Or you can do a phone call on Skype or another telecommunication medium. That means that the larger the network is, and the standards are comparable, the more you can use it. And the more you can use it, the more activity and business is developed. So the same thing is for air transport. The larger the network, the more people will use that network and will use that network to move from one place to another. If to go from, let's say, from Italy to southern Italy to the US, you have to go from that southern Italian town to Rome, from Rome to London to New York, and then from New York go to Milwaukee in the US. Well, that is pretty complicated trip. Instead, if you have a direct flight from, let's say, Palermo, New York, well, hey, that's interesting. I have one whole leg, which is Palermo, New York, and then in New York, I'll take my connection to wherever I have to go if I have to go to Milwaukee. That means instead of having 4 routes to do, I have only 2, which means saving time and the stress and so on. So the larger the network, the more profitable this network is because you capture clients. So airlines enter agreements which can be regional agreements in the sense that they are at a European level, but most commonly they reach agreements at transnational, at an international level. So first of all, what are the reasons? They want to have a better network reach. You make an alliance. You are a European airline, imagine Lufthansa, which has a very good network in Europe, but you have a very weak network in North America. You do an agreement, an alliance with an American company, and therefore this allows you to offer your services and to sell your services and say, listen, you can fly Lufthansa directly to the most remote place, Boulder, Colorado. Okay, you want to go fly Lufthansa from Frankfurt to Boulder, Colorado? One ticket? Well, obviously, this is, well, you have to change somewhere. You may have to change in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a very big hub, and then you go on to Colorado, but you always fly Lufthansa anyhow, a flight that is controlled by Lufthansa. So there's an alliance between Lufthansa and an American airline. So this enables you to capture passengers. So you're not losing your clients. You have German clients who want to buy Lufthansa, have to do with Lufthansa. They pay you in Germany, and they say, well, you provide for my trip, and I don't want to start looking for another company that has to provide this kind of services. So first of all, you're offering further, your network is much wider. If you fly, next time you happen to fly and you look on the substantially on the last pages on the magazine of the in-flight magazine, you will find the routes, and you will see that many of these routes are not provided by the air company itself, but by some allied company. Or further, you want to open up a new route, but you're not very convinced that you can make money, so you find an alliance with another company which is already providing that route and the plane is already full. Just imagine from Atlanta to Boulder, Atlanta, Georgia to Boulder, Colorado. Well, the plane has lots of domestic flyers, and there are also a certain amount of passengers that arrive by Lufthansa, arrive to Atlanta, Georgia, disembark from the Lufthansa flight and go on this other flight. So it isn't that you have to have a plane, your own pilots and so on, and fill it up. No, there's already another plane that is a domestic flight, and you put your passengers, the passengers that are Lufthansa passengers, you put them on this allied company, and they will fly with an allied company. And then obviously you can coordinate schedules. Say, listen, well, typically Rome, Paris, an agreement between Air France and Alitalia, which exists, say, hey, listen, it's no use we both have flights from Rome to Paris at 8 o'clock in the morning or vice versa at the same time. Let's schedule them. So one flight is at 8 o'clock. My flight, Alitalia, is 8 o'clock. Air France flight is at 10 o'clock, 12, 14, 16, 18, and so on. So our passengers can choose whether they want to fly Alitalia or Air France, but they have the double choices. They have, instead of having only 4 flights a day, they have 8 flights a day from Rome to Paris and vice versa. So this has a great advantage for passengers. So what do we have? Alliances which are on sort of overlapping routes. The example that I've made to you, this last example, Rome, Paris, Paris, Rome, Alitalia, Air France. Those are overlapping. So both companies are providing the services, and the alliance between these companies restricts competition by others. Let's imagine that there's low-cost airline, there's EasyJet that wants to provide that service, and well, it finds that that this alliance between Alitalia and France means that very strong two big companies, Alitalia very strong in Italy, Air France very strong in France and in the world, and well, this restricts on this route. This is telling competitor, let's say EasyJet, listen, we have 8 flights a day, Rome, Paris, 8 flights a day, Paris, Rome. There's not much you can, that means just think of a normal Airbus, which has more or less 200 seats, 180 seats. Well, you can see you can carry, if you have 108 flights, that means you can carry 800 to 1,500 passengers per day, one way and the other. And so there's not much competitor can scrape and bring home on his or its airline. So it has substantially restricts the market. Or non-overlapping routes, and that's the case I've mentioned of the alliance between a Lufthansa and an American airline flying from Frankfurt to Atlanta, Georgia, and then from Atlanta, Georgia to Boulder, Colorado. So this is not overlapping routes. There's an alliance which allows you to extend your route. You do not cover that route, but sort of you're opening up a service for your clients. So there are much less competition issues on that kind of non-overlapping routes. Where the problem is, and we see it in tomorrow's case, is on overlapping routes. When there's an alliance that puts together companies that are providing services on the same market. In the case of Paris, Rome-Paris and Paris-Rome route, well, that is a typical market, and there's no doubt that Alitalia and Air France are, hypothetically being 2 different companies, are competing between themselves, and here they join together and have an alliance by code sharing. We shall see what code sharing is, and they somehow may have a restrictive effect on competition. So what do we have? We have a tactical or strategic alliance. A tactical alliance is when carriers want to address a specific deficiency in their network, and it involves generally 2 carriers and cover a limited number of routes with the principal objective of providing connectivity to each carrier's respective networks. I'm not covering Latin America. I'm not able to bring my passengers from my country, from Malta to Latin America. I mean, obviously, it is not convenient, but I will find an agreement with Aerolíneas Argentinas, which covers most, let's imagine, or Avianca, which cover most of the Latin American countries, and I will say, well, I will go from Malta to Madrid, and then from Madrid, my passengers, my Malta Air Malta passengers will go on to Aerolíneas Argentinas, and then we'll be able to go not only to Argentina, but go to Chile, Peru, or whatever, or Brazil, or whatever airport in Brazil, or do it with another company. So what you're doing, this is a typical tactical, you want to broaden your network because you want to make it more appealing. So if there are any passengers that want to go from Malta to Latin America, you don't want to lose them. You want them to be your passengers, and you find a tactical agreement with another company which allows you to somehow to use their lines. And the same thing, if there's any passenger that from Latin America, from the whole big Latin America that wants to go to Malta, well, they go to Madrid and then they board the Air Malta flight. So just to point out, this is a typical tactical agreement, alliance. Strategic alliance is instead something more complex, in which create much more competition issues, as we shall see. First of all, we see that these alliances are very limited. Presently, we find only 3 alliances: Star Alliance, SkyTeam, OneWorld. So it is, there are only 3 alliances for the moment, in the aviation world, which means that there are 3 groups. They are somehow competing. We shall see in a moment that they are somehow, each of these alliances has partner airlines in various parts of the world, but it is a limited amount of alliance. So what are these global alliances? These are global in the sense they cover the whole world: US, China, Africa, Far East, Europe, obviously. So this is just to point out that they're global alliances. So what happens? They start from the code sharing, and next time you go to the airport, just remember, when you look at the display, you will see that that flight is your flight that is taken. You're taken often has a different code. It is always the same flight. It is going from, let's say, from Paris to Prague, but you see that the display changes, and it says it's not only, let's say, imagine that you've bought an Air France ticket, so it's an AF something, and you see that it changes, and maybe you find it's CZ, which is Czech airline. So it is in code sharing. So you bought a flight which is sold as their own by another airline of the alliance. This is code sharing. That means that each member of the alliance in the code sharing agreement sells that flight as if it were its own, and vice versa. This is on the basis, obviously, of reciprocity. So clearly it happens if in the typical code sharing agreement between Alitalia and Air France, as I mentioned, let's say 4 flights a day, Rome-Paris by Alitalia, and 4 flights a day by Air France from Rome to Paris. In code sharing, well, it's the same thing. I mean, you can buy a flight, and you can buy any of these 8 opportunities. Then you will discover that maybe you're not flying as on Alitalia. You've gone on the Alitalia website, but the flight is operated by Air France and vice versa. So this is the first, the code sharing is one of the main elements of an alliance. But this alliance means that you are offering on your schedule, on your website, you are offering a certain flight which is provided by a different company. It appears as being your flight, but it is operated, that is, the plane is operated by a different company. This is a very efficient way of alliance. This is one of the main reasons of alliance, and it has obviously a certain amount of competitive concerns. Just to look at Star Alliance, you see it as Adria, which is Croatia, Aegean Greek, Air Canada, Canada, Air China, New Zealand, ANA, all Nippon Airlines, that is Japan, Asiana, sorry, I'm trying to remember, Asiana, if it's Central Asia, sorry. Then Austrian, Avianca, Latin American, TACA, Central America. Avianca is Latin America. TACA is Transportes Aéreos Centros Americanos, Latin America. Brussels Airlines, obviously, Belgium. Copa is again Central American. Croatia, Egypt Air, Ethiopian, Polish Airlines, Lufthansa, Scandinavian, Singapore, South Africa, Swiss, TAM, sorry, I forget what TAM is. I think it's Japanese. TAP is Transportes Portugal, Thai, Turkish Airlines, United Airlines, US Airways. So you see that this covers, Star Alliance covers, well, all continents. It has a couple of, maybe the less served is Africa. You see, well, South Africa, Ethiopians, and Egypt Air, but then you see the rest of the world is well covered. And obviously, you see that Lufthansa is the main airline, that somehow most important airlines, but has two American partners to cover the whole of North America, United Airlines and US Airways. Let's look at the SkyTeam, which is smaller, but covers a lot of part of the world. Aeroflot, Russia. As you see, the Russia is not covered in Starlines, as is in Russia, they're not, Aeroflot is the main airline. So you see that Russia is not covered very well by, there's no, Lufthansa covers Russia pretty well, but here we have Aeroflot, Aerolíneas Argentinas, Aeromexico, Air Europa, Air France, Alitalia, China Airlines, China Eastern, China Southern, Czech Airlines, Delta Airlines, Kenya Airlines, KLM, Dutch, Korean, Middle East Airlines, that is Lebanon, Saudi, Tarom, that is Romania, Vietnam Airlines. So you see, this is another alliance. And then if you look at One World, it's Air Berlin, which has gone bankrupt, so we can take that off the line. American Airlines, British Airways, Cathay Pacific, Finnair, Iberia, Japan Airlines, Mexicana, Qantas, that is Australia, Royal Jordanian. So you see, this is the main airline here is British Airways. Here in this, it is mostly Air France and Delta, which are the Air France in France and Delta in the US. And in this other one, Star Alliance, the main is Lufthansa and United and US Airways. So these are alliances. So just imagine that you are, once you are from one of these countries, you are someone who is in Poland. Well, it is quite obvious that if you are used to taking a lot Polish airlines, well, you will buy, and you're looking at the, you go on the lot website and you want to go, let's imagine you want to go to Belgium, well, you will find that you have connections and there's an exchange between Warsaw and Brussels and vice versa, a lot and Brussels Airlines. So it's very simple with code sharing. Or you want to go from Warsaw to very distant place, you want to go to Egypt, well, you will find a code sharing agreement with Egypt Air by which from Warsaw you can fly directly to Cairo to, let's say you want to go to Luxor and see the tombs of the King's Valley. Just to point out that this allows you, passengers to have a very wide choice and to not to have to buy two different tickets, because clearly if you had to buy two different tickets, well, this is complex, and then you ask yourself what is going to happen. You have only one ticket, and this ticket covers you wherever you have to go around the world. And the same thing happens in these other alliances. There are less companies in these alliances, but as you see, they cover pretty well the rest of the world. You see that, well, maybe Africa here we have only Kenya Airways, but also here there's quite a good selection of companies that cover the rest of the world. So just to finish here before the lesson here, just airline alliance agreements, you see that there's in this slide, we see the various levels of alliance. There's a low level and a high level. Interlining, what is interlining? Interlining is something that has always existed, is substantially an agreement, a bilateral agreement between two companies saying, well, even if we are not in alliance, if I'm taking a connecting flight, I'm going from Rome to Paris and then from Paris to Martinique. Let's imagine that they are not, Air France and Alitalia are not allied, but there's only one ticket and we will share revenue. So it's interlining. It's just simply the fact that you have only one ticket and you don't have two tickets, which has certain advantages for passengers that simplifies life. But then we look at more higher levels of alliance, frequent flying program, the fact that you collect miles and therefore you have a bonus, you have a free trip and access to a premium to business class lounge, and then code sharing, I've mentioned that. And then we find direct coordination, which means prices, routes, scheduling, which means very important when you start coordinating schedules and prices. Well, this has very anti-competitive, can have very highly anti-competitive effects. So just to show you that when we're talking about alliances, well, the competition is very much involved, and we have to try to understand what is the position of the European Union concerning these alliances, and whether, when, and to what extent they fall under the scrutiny of Article 101, first paragraph, or they can somehow fall under the exceptions of paragraph 101 of Article 101, paragraph 3. But we shall see this tomorrow together with the case that will be presented by Asayag. Are there questions on this day's lesson?
I have a question.
Yes.
On this lesson, on my presentation.
Yes.
But I don't know if it's relevant for everybody.
Yes, tell me. Go ahead. Yes, so, go ahead.
It's not a case like party versus parties, so I don't really get the question asked in the case. You know?
Yes, but you will present the main issues. This is a decision by the European Commission, so you can imagine that there's a question put by these companies. These companies want to find an alliance. They want to, it is Air France, KLM, Alitalia, and Delta, if I'm correct. And so they want to find an agreement. They want to do code sharing. And they have, on the one hand, they have overlapping routes, and on the other hand, they have non-overlapping routes. So the problem is, so the question is, can they do this agreement? Can they find this agreement? And well, your presentation will be showing what are the principles where this agreement can work, to what extent it can work, and what are the restrictions that the Commission says, yes, you can find an agreement, but at these conditions, you must do this and that. So obviously it is different from a case presentation, because obviously we don't have a referral for interpretation by the European Court of Justice, but those principles that have been affirmed in that case, in that decision, we find them repeated in other decisions by the Commission, and have by and large been confirmed when they're being challenged in front of the Court of First Instance and the Court of Justice. They're being confirmed. So I mean, just the presentation, just say what did these four companies want to do, and what is the answer by the Commission. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Galea, for your presentation, and see you tomorrow is at 2:15.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody.